$180 million. That's how much one group of multinational companies secretly paid to win more than $6 billion in government contracts. The scheme lasted nearly a decade. It sent executives to prison. It led to more than $1.5 billion in corporate penalties. And at the center of it all was something with an almost harmless name, the Cultural Committee. It sounds like an HR initiative. It wasn't. It was the committee responsible for planning one of the largest corporate bribery operations in modern business history. This isn't just the story of Halliburton. It's the story of how four global engineering giants built a corruption system so organized that bribery became another business process. And once you see how they did it, you'll never look at billion-dollar contracts the same way again. To understand how this happened, we need to go back to Nigeria in the mid-1990s. At the time, Nigeria possessed one of the world's largest natural gas reserves. Turning that gas into liquefied natural gas, or LNG, would require massive processing facilities on Bonny Island. The contracts were enormous, worth more than $6 billion. Winning them would guarantee years of revenue. Losing meant watching your competitors take one of the most lucrative energy projects in the world. Four companies decided they weren't going to lose. They formed a joint venture called TSKJ. It brought together KBR, then part of Halliburton, France's Technip, Italy's Snam Progetti, and Japan's JGC. On paper, it looked like an ordinary international partnership created to deliver one of the world's largest engineering projects. Behind the scenes, it became something very different. According to U.S. prosecutors, executives inside the consortium reached a simple conclusion. The fastest way to win wasn't by submitting the best proposal, it was by bribing the people deciding who would receive the contracts. But they weren't about to hand over cash in parking lots. If they were going to break the law, they were going to do it professionally. If bribery was going to become part of the business, it needed structure. So the executives created something they called the Cultural Committee. The name sounds almost innocent, like a group responsible for international etiquette or cross-cultural communication. That wasn't its purpose. According to U.S. court filings, the committee existed for one reason: to decide who should be bribed, how much they should receive, and how the money would get there. Think about that for a second. This wasn't one dishonest employee making a terrible decision. This wasn't one executive acting alone. This was governance, meetings, approvals, planning. The same discipline used to manage billion-dollar engineering projects was now being used to manage corruption. And the committee quickly realized something important. Not every government official should be approached the same way. So they built a tiered system. For senior Nigerian officials, they used one intermediary. For lower-ranking officials, they used another. It was corruption with an organizational chart. To move the money without attracting attention, the consortium signed what appeared to be legitimate consulting agreements. On paper, everything looked routine. In reality, those contracts were designed to disguise bribe payments. The most important figure in the operation was a London-based lawyer named Jeffrey Tesler. Through companies he controlled, Tesler received roughly $132 million that prosecutors say was intended for high-ranking Nigerian officials. For lower-level officials, the consortium relied on the Japanese trading company Marubeni, which received another $51 million to distribute payments. Together, those two channels moved more than $180 million, not through secret suitcases crossing borders, not through underground criminal networks, through paperwork, invoices, consulting agreements, bank transfers, documents that looked legitimate to anyone who wasn't asking the right questions. That's one of the biggest lessons in this story. Major corporate fraud rarely looks dramatic while it's happening. It usually looks like administration. One signature, one invoice, one payment approval, repeated hundreds of times. But occasionally, the operation became impossible to hide behind paperwork. In one documented incident in Abuja, Jeffrey Tesler arranged for $1 million in cash to be delivered inside a travel bag. The exchange took place in the lobby of a luxury hotel. Just imagine that scene. A bag containing $1 million in $100 bills, walking through the front doors of a hotel. Not hidden underground, not in the middle of the night, in public. The people involved weren't acting like criminals afraid of getting caught. They acted like executives who believed nobody would ever question them. And perhaps the most remarkable part, for years, Nobody did, because the people running the scheme weren't outsiders. They were some of the most respected executives in the global energy industry. And at the very top of that list was the man leading KBR itself. The man at the center of the operation wasn't a middleman. He wasn't a consultant. He wasn't even the lawyer moving the money. He was the CEO, Albert Jack Stanley, Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Kellogg Brown and Root, better known as KBR. According to prosecutors, Stanley wasn't simply aware of the bribery scheme. He helped direct it. Court records describe meetings between Stanley and senior Nigerian government officials before major contract awards. The purpose of those meetings wasn't to discuss engineering specifications or project schedules or construction timelines. Instead, prosecutors alleged that Stanley and his co-conspirators asked senior Nigerian officials to appoint representatives so the consortium would know exactly who to negotiate the bribes with. Think about how extraordinary that is. The CEO of one of America's largest engineering firms wasn't negotiating pipelines. He was allegedly negotiating the bribery process itself. That tells you something important. This wasn't corruption happening somewhere deep inside the organization. It came from the top. And then the story became even bigger. In 1998, Dresser Industries, the parent company of KBR, merged with Halliburton. Halliburton was already one of the biggest names in the global oil and gas industry. Its CEO at the time was Dick Cheney. After the merger, Cheney appointed Jack Stanley to lead KBR. That meant the bribery scheme, which had already begun years earlier, continued while KBR operated under the Halliburton umbrella. According to the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, Halliburton's internal controls failed to detect or prevent the bribery scheme between 1998 and 2006. Company records were also falsified to disguise the payments. Internal controls exist for a reason. Large companies are supposed to have approval processes, compliance teams, internal auditors, finance departments, and executives responsible for ensuring money goes where it's supposed to. Yet somehow, more than $180 million moved through fake consulting agreements over the course of years. That raises an uncomfortable question. Was the system ineffective, or did the people responsible simply choose not to ask difficult questions? Either way, the paper trail eventually caught up with them. By the mid-2000s, investigators in the United States, Europe, and Nigeria had begun examining the consortium's activities. Years of hidden payments, consulting agreements, bank transfers, and witness testimony were finally being pieced together. One document led to another, one payment led to another, until the entire structure began to collapse. The companies that once looked untouchable suddenly found themselves facing one of the largest Foreign Corrupt Practices Act investigations ever conducted. And once prosecutors had the documents, there was no putting the story back in the box. When the investigations finally reached the courtroom, the consequences were enormous. In 2009, KBR and its former parent company, Halliburton, agreed to pay $579 million to resolve U.S. criminal and civil enforcement actions. At the time, it was the largest combined Foreign Corrupt Practices Act settlement ever paid by American companies. KBR pleaded guilty to criminal charges. It agreed to pay a $402 million criminal fine. But that wasn't the end. The other members of the consortium, including Technip, Snam Progetti, JGC, and Marubeni, would eventually face enforcement actions of their own. By the time the investigations were over, the companies involved had paid more than $1.5 billion in penalties. Then came the individual, Jack Stanley, the man who once ran KBR. The executive prosecutors described as one of the architects of the scheme. After years of legal delays, including 16 separate sentencing postponements, Stanley was finally sentenced to 30 months in federal prison for conspiring to violate the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Standing before the judge, he admitted he had lost his way. He told the court that alcoholism had compromised his judgment and his values. For the man who had overseen billions of dollars in projects, it was an extraordinary downfall. Jeffrey Tessler, the London lawyer accused of helping move the money, was also sentenced to prison. He forfeited approximately $149 million held in Swiss bank accounts. The proceeds, prosecutors said, came from facilitating the bribery scheme. The money was gone. The reputations were gone. The companies had paid record-breaking fines. But one question still lingers. Did crime actually pay? Let's do the math. The contracts awarded to the consortium were worth more than $6 billion. The combined penalties eventually exceeded $1.5 billion. Those fines were historic, but they were still only a fraction of the value of the contracts the companies secured. That's one of the uncomfortable realities of corporate crime. Punishment doesn't always erase profit, and while executives faced prison and corporations paid billions, many of the Nigerian officials alleged to have received the bribes were never convicted in court as part of this case. The people paying the money became household names. Many of the people receiving it remained largely in the shadows. Which brings us back to where we started. This story wasn't really about a suitcase full of cash. It wasn't even about $180 million in bribes. It was about systems. The same planning, the same governance, the same project management, and the same documentation used to build one of the world's largest LNG facilities were also used to build one of the world's most sophisticated bribery operations. Nothing about it looked chaotic. There were committees, approvals, consultants, contracts, payment structures. Everything had a process. That's what makes this case so disturbing. The corruption wasn't hidden outside the business. It was built into the business. And that's the lesson every procurement professional, auditor, compliance officer, and executive should remember. Corporate scandals rarely begin with one bad decision. They begin when an organization creates a system that makes unethical decisions feel routine. Because once corruption becomes a process, people stop questioning it. They simply follow it. This is Blackfire Audit. Follow the paper trail.